Here's why the Steam Deck deserves more credit. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Deck Ready. Happy Star Wars Day when I'm filming this. I shot a video earlier in the week that's going to go up before this one, but right now it's Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you, all that. So we've been talking a lot here on the channel about people who use the Steam Deck to watch YouTube or stream movies, stuff like that. You know what I'm talking about. Watch entertainment on your Steam Deck because it is a handheld PC. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone do anything this funny is the word for it I think I'm going to use. The user Primate on Reddit posted this picture and they said, anyone else order pizza off their deck yet? And they've got the Domino's pizza tracker right there on the screen. This is some real ingenuity from the Steam Deck community out there. Gotta commend it. This is awesome. Domino's is definitely that pizza place where I get it once a month because I'm really craving it. I really want crappy pizza that's super greasy, but because I live in LA, they have some rules or something that makes it objectively worse than anywhere else in the country. It ruins my stomach for like 3 days. Then magically I forget all about it and I want Domino's again like a month later. I would order, I don't know, maybe like Pitfire or something. The pizza's not good out here in LA. If I was back in Michigan, I would get like Jet's Pizza probably on my Steam Deck. But if you've ever ordered pizza on your Steam Deck, let me know down in the comments. And then now with the quick stuff out of the way, let's get into the meat of this video. So for today's video, I really wanted to talk about an article I read over on Trusted Reviews titled ROG Ally and Steam Deck have lost sight of what makes the Switch great. Now, of course, right away, I was like, I could not disagree more as a big Steam Deck user, but I decided to read the article and quickly figured out that this is basically an article about the ROG Ally, but they put the Steam Deck in the title because they needed the SEO, because no one's really searching as much for the ROG Ally. I respect the hustle as a YouTuber, but I still wanted to go through the article a little bit and kind of refute it because I disagree with the premise entirely. So the first thing that I kind of took issue with in this article is that they knocked the Steam Deck for its price compared to the Switch, and then there's a little parentheses right after they list the $649 Steam Deck that says, oh, you can also get one for $399, which ironically has around the same internal storage as the Switch does, no matter which one you buy. But yeah, I'm assuming they added that in later. It kind of makes my point for me though. The Steam Deck is roughly the same price as the Switch, right? You get a Switch OLED now, it's $349. You get a Steam Deck for $400. It comes with 64 gigabytes of internal storage. Now, where the Switch does have the upper hand is that you can get games where all of the data is on the cartridge and then you don't have to install anything to the Switch. So theoretically, you can take that 64 gigabytes a little bit farther than the Steam Deck, right? Like The Witcher 3 is a great example of a game where they paid to get bigger Switch cartridges so they could fit the entire game on there. Of course, there were some performance patches later, but the whole game is on the cartridge and that's awesome. Whereas with the Steam Deck, games are all digital regardless. I've seen some people have micro SD cards that are around 16 or 32 gigs and they keep one game on them and then they kind of like label them or they put them in little cases, and I think that's really cool. But you know, you have to buy each individual SD card. That's pricing on top of the game. So where the Switch I think does have the Steam Deck technically beat is that some games have the entire game on the cartridge, but very few of them actually do that. Regardless of whether you buy a Switch or a Steam Deck, you're going to have to get a bigger micro SD card, and these use the same SD cards, right? Like the Steam Deck does work better if you use faster speed SD cards, I have found, especially if you want to put Windows 11 on an SD card, you should definitely go with a much faster one. But the Switch will pretty much work with any SD card you throw at it because, I don't know, it runs games at a lower spec, or Nintendo just figured it out with their operating system. But regardless, you've got at least, you know, like 30 or 40 bucks on top of that main asking price if you want to get more memory out of your device. So that's kind of like a non-starter for me. And the real benefit of the Steam Deck obviously is that you can also upgrade the internal storage. So you could buy that 64 gigabyte model and then also get a cheaper SSD off of eBay, or go for one of these Sabrent ones that'll only increase the price by around $100, and then you're looking at an extra terabyte of internal storage, and you could just wait for a deal on a micro SD card to get an extra terabyte. Whereas with the Switch, you've got the 64 gigabytes and the OLED that come with it stock. You're really limited by the micro SD card on how much you can increase the storage. So for me, unless you're talking about the ROG Ally, which starts at $600, comparing the Steam Deck and the Switch in this scenario does not really make any sense because the difference of $50 up front doesn't really mean a whole lot to most people. The next part of the article that lumps in the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally against the Switch when it should really be the Switch and Steam Deck versus the ROG Ally is talking about how it's pushing pixels on the screen and going for higher resolution, higher refresh rate screens. The Switch, obviously out of the three, has the best looking screen, I would argue, because it's OLED. But beyond that, the Steam Deck and the Switch technically have the exact same resolution, right? Like the Switch is 720p, the Steam Deck is 800p, but the only reason for that is that the Steam Deck is 16 by 10 and the Switch is 16 by 9. Whereas the ROG Ally has a 1920 by 1080 screen and it's 120 hertz. And this is like a point of criticism that I've seen for Steam Deck users. They're like, why would you want a 1920 by 1080 screen in a handheld? Because A, it's going to suck more battery life. B, all of the benchmarks that were given for this device were running the games at 720p and upscaling them, which kind of negates the purpose of having a 1080p screen in the first place. And C, you're not really going to ever be able to take advantage of 120 hertz on the ROG Ally unless you have the eGPU plugged in, but then you're using it as a desktop theoretically, unless you want to like daisy chain the eGPU sitting on your table in front of you to the ROG Ally and then take advantage of the 120 hertz screen, but then you're going to be CPU bottlenecks. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the best idea to put a 120 hertz 1080p screen in a handheld, and that's kind of what the article is knocking. But my issue again is lumping in the Steam Deck there because it has the same kind of screen as the Nintendo Switch, and it's arguably a worse screen because it's not OLED. One of the coolest things about the Steam Deck though is that if you do dock it, you can play a lot of games at 1080p because it's essentially a more powerful Nintendo Switch. Stuff like Dredge, Hades, Dead Cells, these indie games that look and run super well in handheld mode also look and run super well in desktop mode, and you'll be able to get a higher resolution out of them from running them in a dock, which is really cool. So arguably when you dock the Steam Deck, you will get a better experience out of it than the Nintendo Switch, which is really cool. The same thing goes for the ROG Ally though, like you'll get better performance than the Switch and the Steam Deck. So the next point is one I kind of agree with. It basically says that with the Nintendo Switch, all you have to worry about beyond storage is just popping the game into your console or downloading it and you are good to go. You're going to get a AAA experience. Now with the Steam Deck, you could argue that it's basically the same thing, and it's even easier because a lot of games now, the vast majority of them at least, have default settings for the Steam Deck that work totally well. A great example of that is a game I talked about earlier in the week, Resident Evil 7. That game's base settings run at 60 FPS. I ended up only changing one setting, which was turning FSR off and then dropping it to 40 hertz, 40 FPS because I found that was a better experience, but it was totally playable at 60 FPS out of the box. And I'm pretty sure even if Resident Evil 7 is available on the Switch, it's a cloud streaming game, which is kind of deceptive and not so simple as just popping the game in and playing a AAA experience. Also, the idea that the Switch really offers a AAA experience may have been true when this thing came out and we were getting games like Doom and Wolfenstein 2 and Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, but now those third-party releases are few and far between, and when they do come to the Switch, they're generally pretty bad overall in terms of performance. I mean, you really can't even compare most of them to how they look or run on the Steam Deck. It's not even a fair competition to the Switch. I do agree though that the ROG Ally makes things more complicated because it doesn't have SteamOS 3.0. Now I know you could just use the new big picture mode and that would kind of maybe take over Windows for you, but I've used that on Windows on my TV and it's a lot more finicky than it is on the Steam Deck. Buttons stop registering sometimes, getting back to the main menu and the home menu on big picture mode isn't always great. Sometimes you just get a black screen when you try to launch games. Like that definitely feels like a beta experience, whereas the Steam Deck feels like it's got a whole operating system of its own, even though it's really a compatibility layer running on top of a desktop. ROG Ally on the other hand uses Windows 11, which look, I love PC gaming. It's my preferred place to play out of everything I have. The Steam Deck and my gaming laptop are number one, followed very closely by the PlayStation 5. I cannot tell you how many weird game tricks I have to run on pretty much every release. Like even ones that come out like Dead Island 2, where it's largely a pretty perfect experience on PC. I found that the VSync was pretty crappy in the game, as was the frame limiter, so I had to go into NVIDIA control panel, set it to 60 FPS, and then also use NVIDIA control panel's VSync because it was working better. Now the average person, the Switch player, isn't going to want to deal with any of that that, and they probably don't know how to deal with stuff like that. So I feel like problems like that will definitely crop up on the ROG Ally, mainly because it's Windows being smashed down into a handheld form. So on their point that it's so much easier to just play games on the Switch, I disagree when you're comparing it to the Steam Deck. Even though you can get a pretty complicated experience if you want, the Steam Deck is really good at just playing games you download from Steam. It'll download your saves right away where you pick up right where you left off on your main PC. It'll usually go for the right preset 9 times out of 10, and I'm willing to say that's good enough, or more than good enough with the Steam Deck, to the point where I'm arguing this point pretty hard. I think the ROG Ally is the one that this should be aimed at, but once again, the Steam Deck's only in this title, I think, because they needed the SEO. Another point I agree with, if you separate the Steam Deck out once again, is that this hardware comes out way too fast. On the Windows side of things, you could get an Aya Neo and there might be a new version announced by the time you actually get that thing in your hands, and that is totally unacceptable in my opinion. It creates an environment where you'll never actually want to pull the trigger and buy one of these Windows handhelds, because you're always going to be sitting there thinking about a better one coming out in just a couple months, which is not even an exaggeration. On the Aya Neo side of things, they really do release those things a couple times every couple months. It's actually pretty crazy how fast they pump those things out, and I would expect that that will affect the longevity of those devices, because there's no way they're able to test them well or long enough to make sure they'll be able to withstand the test of time. I understand that it's cool having something, and then when you look at the Switch and the Steam Deck, one of the most common criticisms against Nintendo is that they let these generations go on far too long. People have been begging for a hardware upgraded Switch for years now, and it's the biggest reason why I don't really play my Switch so much anymore outside of owning the Steam Deck. When it comes to the Steam Deck, they're not deterred at all by all of these higher powered, higher performing units that are being put out running Windows, because they know that the Steam Deck they have now is something that they can work on the software side to make it run better. And if they want to upgrade any hardware, they can upgrade the screen, they can upgrade the fans, they can upgrade the battery, they can upgrade the controls, they can upgrade the trackpads, they can make a Steam Deck 2 that's kind of like the Switch OLED to the original Switch, and it'll probably work out just fine because the chip in the Steam Deck is more than capable still. But the point I think this article misses severely is that the best part about the Steam Deck is that it lets you fine-tune how advanced of an experience you want. There's definitely an iceberg here, right? The tip of the iceberg is just downloading games, playing them at the recommended preset, right? Like, you don't mess with the screen hertz, you don't mess with the settings, you don't mess with the FPS, you just play it at the recommended settings that it uses out of the box. And then the next layer of the iceberg is maybe setting the screen to 40 hertz and playing at 40 FPS and learning about why 40 FPS looks a lot better than keeping the screen at 60 hertz and limiting to 30 FPS. And then the next layer of the iceberg is saying, hey, maybe the screen is a little washed out, so I'm going to go research how to download Decky Loader and then add Vibrant Deck to my Decky Loader in the quick access menu, and then I'll get a little slider for the saturation on the Steam Deck. And then you have the next layer, which is going into the Discover store and getting things like Spotify or Discord and figuring out how to get an extension for Discord, like a plugin for Decky that lets you keep all of your Discord notifications in the quick access menu, or be able to skip the song that's playing on Cider, the Apple Music app that I use on the Steam Deck. And then the next layer of the iceberg is downloading EmuDeck and letting it configure all these different emulators for you and playing older Nintendo DS games or PS1 games, or like me, Rock Band Unplugged on the PSP. And then you can get even crazier and set it up as your own full desktop. Get the Steam Deck dock, plug in your keyboard, your mouse, your monitor, dock your Steam Deck, and then use this thing for work. I mean, we've seen what they're doing over in Ukraine with this. They're using it to operate literal machine guns. So my point here is that while the title ROG Ally and Steam Deck have lost sight of what makes the Switch great, works for the ROG Ally versus the Switch, I think the Steam Deck does not deserve to be in this title, A, but B is kind of the perfect middle point between both of these options. You get the more advanced side of PC gaming, which is like messing with your GPU megahertz, limiting the screen refresh rate and frame rate, messing around with game settings, but you also get that out of the box, download a game, start it up, and just play it as is experience that you get with the Nintendo Switch. And that's why I think the Steam Deck is the best of both worlds and is so great. And it's also why I don't think the ROG Ally is going to make as big of a dent as it seems like all of these articles are acting like it's going to. If the Steam Deck didn't really matter, they wouldn't be including it so much in every single title about the ROG Ally. I mean, I challenge you to find maybe more than 3 or 4 articles about the ROG Ally that don't have the Steam Deck in the title, because it's actually pretty tough.